Hey gang, Scott here. Quick video for you about balancing exposure in a landscape and using curves to help you do that. Yeah, I know I talk about curves a lot, but it's because curves are so useful and the tool is everywhere. Any package that you like to use for your editing, Lightroom, Photoshop, on one, Luminar, it's got curves in it, and it's got curves with masking, which is where I think it's most useful for balancing exposure. So let me show you this photo here. I'm just getting started work on. Sunrise, Thor's Hammer in Bryce Canyon. Took this a few months ago during the Bryce workshop in February, and this is a very contrasty scene. Of course, you're shooting directly into the sun. The foreground is going to be quite shadowed. And I've done my basics, but the first thing, one of the first things I really need to tackle for this photo is balancing the exposure, opening up the foreground. So quickly we'll grab a sky mask and then we'll invert that. Right, so now we have, basically the foreground. Now the first thought, let's collapse some of these panels here. And you can take exposure and you can just raise exposure. And it's going to do it everywhere. And it's going to do a pretty decent job, but that's a healthy amount of exposure. I mean, I was stop plus that I'm pulling that up. That's one approach. Another is to leverage curves. And I'll just choose the picker here. Let me turn off the mask view. And the reason I like the curves is if I go down out into this mid ground here and pick one of the middle tones. Notice the point on the curve. It's like low midtones. And I start pulling that up. Well, what's happening is, yes, I'm increasing exposure because I'm raising the curve and adding more brightness. But because of the curve, there is less happening in the shadows, a pretty healthy amount in the midtones, and it tapers off toward the highlights. It's an interesting, more gradual exposure bump. And I can compensate, or augment, I should say, with the exposure slider too, and I'm not having to push as hard because I don't want those shadows to really open up, which if I pushed exposure very far, then I'd have to be countering with the shadow slider and this and that. I can leverage the curve to help me do that. And so just those two adjustments, before and after, I'm already well on my way to this photo's more balanced now, and I can get into the more artistic part of editing it, adding the right amount of detail, dodging burning, some color correction because I got some blue casts in the snow, etc., etc. But the thing I wanted to show you was leveraging curves when you are doing any type of exposure balancing in your landscapes. Take a look at it, see how it works for you. I think you'll find a place for it in your workflow. Any other questions, drop them below. And until next time, my name's Scott Davenport. Have fun.